Benjamin Butterworth is with us, talk about all of the big topics. Let's just talk briefly about the police story again, because we've spoken about that a lot in the last hour. What did you make of what our guest Nusrat Mehtab said? She's a former Met Police superintendent, and she herself is from an ethnic minority, and she was arguing that this West Yorkshire policy, West Yorkshire police policy, basically allowing ethnic minority candidates to apply throughout the year, but she says they're not given, according to documentation supplied by this whistleblower to the Telegraph, not given priority at the final stage. But of course they will be. I mean, who are we kidding? If you're trying to improve your diversity, in quotes, which apparently is a good thing, we're told all the time, then you're going to be giving priority. If you've got two candidates exactly the same, probably unlikely, but if they were exactly the same, you're gonna take the Asian or the black candidate over the white candidate, aren't you?
I mean, if you take the point that she was making, which is that there are people that don't speak English from ethnic, religious minority communities, well then, by her argument, and with some logic, you'd have to hire a police officer who can liaise with those people in order to reach them.
I just think, no.
And so,
like, my answer to that is, as I said, absolutely no. If you come to this country, you live in this country, and you don't speak English, it is not our job to hire officers who happen to have a background where they'll know that language. I think that is really, really wrong.
But the point she makes, if that's the problem they're trying to solve, well, then of course they're going to be giving preference. But
they're solving it the wrong way. The problem to be solved is that there are people living in this country who don't speak English and can't communicate.
Yeah, I mean, look, absolutely.
That's the problem.
The idea that people here don't speak English that have lived here for decades, it harms their lives, it harms their kids' lives, and often it's women who haven't been given the opportunity by their husbands, and so there's nothing liberal.
Oh, it's almost
about
like we're importing
that.
some cultures that we don't really like. Funny that.
But
remember, everybody, diversity is our strength.
It's a valid question for a police force to say, well, we've got a lot of black people in this area, or a lot of Southeast Asian people. Why don't we have any police officers like that? It's perfectly valid.
But a lot of that is why don't they apply? But again, we also know in lots of areas where when a black police officer tells a black girl that he'll be called even worse names than a white police officer, called things like Oreo or coconut, blatantly racist terms. So you're doing the white man's job, and you're a traitor, and that's a horrible thing that happens to those officers. But again, there's an issue of trust, and I completely get why. And as I pointed out earlier, white people going, I don't know what the issue is. I don't care whether the officer is what colour skin his or her skin is. I don't, for instance, as a woman, I don't need to speak to a woman officer. I could understand in the case of rape or sexual assault, you would feel much more comfortable talking to a woman officer. I get that. But that's a very specific crime. But I just think it's really bizarre. I don't think that every public service, or indeed every job, needs to be representative of the community it deals with. If so, then why do we have something like only 4% of teachers at primary school being men? Why are we not worried about that? Why don't we insist that we have more men teaching kids? I mean, there's a massive issue with young boys who haven't got good role models.
I think more men as teachers might be a good thing.
More men as teachers would be a good thing, but we don't seem to have some policies that enable that to happen. We don't seem to think it's a crisis. I don't need everyone running, or half the people running a FTSE 100 company to be women. There are perfectly good and understandable reasons why women don't end up as CEOs of top FTSE 100 companies, largely because they're too sodding sane and they want to have a better work-life balance. No, I know, listen, I move in a world where I know a lot of women who've got top degrees, who've worked in these sort of businesses. They're earning silly money. They're really, and you know what? They would like to spend some time with their kids. It's as simple as that. And the men who are in those jobs don't spend any time with their kids either, same as the women who haven't got kids who are in those jobs. There are very, very good, understandable reasons why certain jobs tend to be done by certain people. There's a reason why, the bin men issue why do we call them bin men and dinner ladies? Because they're largely men doing that job, largely women doing that job. There's a reason why different people do different jobs.
But then, that's true. And also, I think in both the male and female example there, you have, women that don't have a workplace that's flexible enough, and men that really should spend time with their kids. No, you can't be flexible.
You can't be flexible if you're a CEO of a major company. You need people who are in work, working, a 20-hour day. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's how in their job. And most women are too sane to do that.
I think people that have a family life, a normal life, are probably better at the job.
They might be, but they're not very good at that job, and their job is to be good at that job. No one cares about your family life.
The fact is, there are barriers to some people progressing in these careers. Of course, there are. 50 years ago, the reason I imagine there were no female FTSE 100 CEOs wasn't because there were no women capable. It was because there were barriers.
There was sexism. But again, do you think the world is horribly sexist and racist today? Do you think there are police forces that are not hiring police officers because they're black or Asian today? or because of women. I don't think that is the case. But what I would worry now is there are people who are getting those jobs who perhaps aren't as good as some of the other candidates, because they're being pushed because of what we call positive discrimination, which is just racism or sexism by any other name. And that undermines the ethnic minority officers, it undermines, say, the women officers or gay officers or anything. That undermines these people because people will go, I wonder how you got your job.
But I mean,
it's damaging to people.
There have been reports recently, so Charing Cross Police Station, one in central London, was found to be institutionally sexist, homophobic and racist based on actual things that were going on in the office. Now, when you've got a situation like that, can you imagine if you're a new officer from any of those groups, a woman or a black person, you're not going to feel safe, feel comfortable or content with your work life in that situation. And so it's right that they try and fix those problems.
But dealing with the wrong ones doesn't mean not employing white people.
No, but I don't think that's the conclusion either. I think trying to have a police force that looks like the community is beneficial, but the idea that that means blocking a candidate because he's a straight white man is ridiculous when we struggle to fill the ranks of police officers and we struggle to fill them with people that are competent and that enjoy it. I've had experience with police officers that really don't seem the brightest sparks, and you say you know some that are bright sparks and they want to leave because it's not contenting. And so clearly if the police force dealt with that, they might have better retention.
Absolutely, that is all very fair. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As I say, if you're a police officer in particular, I'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. Let's talk more about these tariffs. Look, we're going to be hit, even Keir Starmer admitted yesterday, we're going to be hit with this tariff war that's ongoing around the world now, as launched by Donald Trump, whether or not our economy is hit by tariffs itself or other countries are, because that could have the effects of a worldwide recession. Shock announcement yesterday, just 4 hours after Donald Trump had been talking about how, everyone should calm down and just relax. It's all fine by Donald Trump. The White House has said he had a spine of steel that he will not break. Critics saying, well, he blinked first. And he did blink, there's no question at all. There was market turmoil, even he admitted it when he told reporters. He said people were getting a little bit yippy. Great word. Yes. A little bit yippy, he said, a little bit out of line. And basically, he paused the higher tariffs that came into force on Wednesday. These were up to, 80-90% for some countries. The only country he didn't pause it for, well, of course, Mexico and Canada still face those 25% tariffs, and China faces now 125% tariffs. Everyone else in the world is now back down to 10%. That's where we were already. That was the default position. So we are still facing tariffs. That is still going to have an impact on British businesses and British jobs, and it's also we're going to see the impact of what's going on between China and America, the two biggest economies in the world. That trade war doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon. I don't think either Xi Jinping or Donald Trump are likely to want to back down in that battle. I could be wrong. Can happen today, who knows? But they've got to both be seen to have some sort of win, I think, for their own egos, that is going to impact the world no matter what. Yeah, I mean, the Chinese ruler said yesterday that the Chinese economy is an ocean, and oceans have storms all the time. It won't really affect us. So he's suggesting that China will be okay. But of course, the reason that we all have plasma televisions and sofas and iPhones in our homes is because of the revolution of Chinese manufacturing that has made this affordable for 40 or 50 years. Exactly, yeah. Now, I actually think at the centre of this, there's a valid question, which is, can countries like the US and Britain and Europe, is it safe, is it secure that we rely on China and other countries like that, Bangladesh, to make everything? And when that comes to things like steel, our industry is about to go under in Scunthorpe. Does that mean that we are vulnerable, that this is actually an irresponsible way to run an economy? I think that's a valid question. There is an argument for protectionist tariffs for key industries. We'll talk about the show in last few days, protect our agriculture and the like, because again, we saw what happened during lockdown and we saw what happened with the Ukraine war, that actually it's all very well having all this wonderful different, just-in-time economy, trading links, but actually when it all breaks down or prices surge and you haven't got, say, energy security or agricultural security or security in producing your own steel, or medicines, you're in a lot of trouble very quickly. By the way, we haven't already had these tariffs on pharmaceuticals. That's another area which the American president is looking at. We already have difficulty getting a lot of medication in this country. There are shortages all the time. Well, one suggestion is that actually if the rest of the world wanted to retaliate, what about not honouring US patents? Because actually pharmaceuticals is a prime example where the whole world
honours those patients.
Well, China doesn't honour anything
besides
like that.
China, yeah. And so actually, if people really wanted a war on this, well, they would stop honouring Microsoft or pharmaceuticals, and then the US would be in trouble.
Yes, good luck with that on that one. Or China could just call in all their debt. They've got trillions in US debt. But this is it. It's a house of cards. It's essentially a big Ponzi scheme. All this government debt that goes on for decades and decades. We can't bring down that house of cards on us because it's going to hurt all of us. That is a trouble. And we saw what happened with the 2008 crisis, following on from what happened in the 1930s as well. We know the damage it does. I mean, it costs people's lives. It's the same as, lockdown. Yeah, you know what? Turning off the economy for a best part of a year and a half, funnily enough, makes the country poorer. And when the country gets poorer, you know what? Public services get poorer, people die, health service can't function, you get into a lot of other issues. If you were Keir Starmer, what would you do right now?
I actually think he's playing it quite well, because
I do as well, actually.
I don't think you want to be too close to Donald Trump, because he always lashes out in the end, and you don't want to be picking a fight with him, because that's what he
We haven't had any special treatment. The whole world's on the same tariff now.
Yeah, and actually, we don't really have a disparity in our trade with the US, and so we shouldn't be a focus. I think just sort of patting him on the head and saying, aren't you a nice man, smiling nicely by the side, is quite a sensible way to do it.
Stop.
Yeah, exactly, because this is the thing. I feel like it was inevitable that these crazy tariffs weren't going to last, because the damage will be foremost on the US economy, and it's always the people at the bottom of the pile that see their jobs go first, and those are the ones that support Donald Trump. And
US farmers who apparently, again, things we've learnt this week, that the biggest, the two biggest trading economies in the world, America and China, and the biggest export from America to China is soy to feed pigs. And then we import all the pig meat.
I didn't know that.
I know exactly, but it's and soy is produced obviously by American farmers. Pretty much all to a man and woman voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
How's that working out for you?
But there's also this idea that America has had a hard deal, which is completely ridiculous. 50 years ago, the US was 25% of the world economy. Today, it's still 25%.
Now, even with all the growth and all the economies.
The growth of everyone else. Nowhere else. Europe, Britain, nothing like what we were 50 years ago. The average income in America is $76,000. I don't know, it's probably about £65,000. A lot of Americans have done very well out of this. Poverty across the world is nothing like it was a generation ago. And so dismantling this system is dangerous.
Not a good idea. But also, crucially, this idea that, we're buying more from Cambodia or Vietnam than they're buying from us in America. Well, of course you are. You're richer and bigger. You're always going to have a trade deficit with those sort of countries. It's quite bizarre. Let's talk about something else before we go to a break, and I'm going to get out to your calls and say always call in on anything you want to talk about, including the tariffs. But this is the most glorious story. We'll talk about this a bit later as well. Hamas is, I kid you not, going to use the European Convention of Human Rights to challenge its prescription as a terrorist organisation in the UK. As you all know, it is a terror organisation that is running Gaza, and they are prescribed as a terrorist organisation because they are terrorists. It's really, really that simple. They claim in a 106-page legal application to the Home Secretary, they're appealing this designation of their organisation as terrorist. They claim the law breaches Hamas supporters' human rights as it unlawfully restricts their freedom of speech and their right to protest. You couldn't make this stuff up, except in Britain, where, of course, you could.
And are these people that are putting this legal bid in, presumably they're in Britain in order to do it, right? In which case, are you not admitting to being part of a prescribed group, which is presently a criminal offence? It seems utterly absurd that you can even admit to being in a prescribed group. Look, you don't have a human right to be a terrorist. I feel like that doesn't need saying.
I think it does these days.
But maybe a court does need to say it.
I mean, for God's sake, don't tell the European Court, because I think they might think, oh, I think you do have a right to do that.
It's patently absurd. And the idea that a human right to believe that you should wipe out Jewish people, a human right to believe that, acts of bombing tube stations and things like have happened in the past, those aren't human rights. Those are evil. Those are terrorism.
And the right to support them. Yeah,
exactly.
It is a crime. And again, it would be nice, frankly, I think, that if a lot of these people were actually being arrested on our streets when they join these marches.
I actually think this court case is fantastic, because we just take the names and then kick them all out because they're admitting to supporting terrorism.
I hate to tell you, an awful lot of them are legally allowed to be here, and some of them are born here. That's the really, really scary thing, but there we are.